Hey guys, what's up? It's Eric with Advanced Level Automotive. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video. Today, I'm out here at my good friend's shop. He called me out because he's got this 2007. This is a Cadillac CTS. It's got the V6 3.6 liter engine, and the customer complaint is that the key will not come out of the ignition. Well, at first that was the problem. The key wouldn't come out of the ignition. However, they were still able to start and drive the vehicle. But what my friend is telling me is that now the vehicle won't even start. It won't power up when you turn the key on. And so there's definitely something else going on here as well. Anyway, he called me out to come take a look at it because he's got his hands full. He's pretty busy. He's a one-man operation, and right now he's pretty busy with this engine. You can see he just pulled it out. Actually, this is pretty cool. I want to show you guys. If you take a look, you can see that this here is the oil pan. And let me show you what happened. So this here is a connecting rod, and as you can see, the piston is completely missing. Well, that's because the piston completely exploded. So check out all the pieces of the piston inside of this oil pan. I mean, take a look at that. That's insane. So it looks like what happened was it dropped a valve into the cylinder number 7, and that valve was making contact with the piston, and it totally destroyed it. Take a look at the cylinder wall. You can see there's a big giant gash in it. I don't know if that's going to be repairable. That gash might be too deep, so this block is probably scrap metal. Anyway, like I said, we're here to check out the Cadillac. Let me take you guys inside and show you what it's doing. All right, so moving inside the car, I've got the key right here in my hand. I'm going to go ahead and stick it into the ignition, and I'm going to turn it on. You guys can see the keys in the on position. However, nothing in our dash is lighting up. Now you can see that we do have a security light blinking over here, and so that may or may not have something to do with what's going on here. However, I will note that that security light was flashing before we even put the key into the ignition. So I don't really know if this light is really related to what's going on here. But like I said, nothing powers up here. You can see the radio. None of this comes on. The AC control head, nothing is powering up. And if I try to take the key out of the ignition, you can see that when I turn it back, I cannot remove the key. It is stuck in there. So let me show you how my friend was able to remove the key. Now, if you look down here, you can see that he already removed the plastic cover. And if you look right here, this is the release for our key. Now, if you push on this tab is actually going to pull this pin here. So let me try to squeeze this. And you can see how that pin just came out right there. Well, that's the release for our key. So now we should be able to remove the key. Yep, there we have it. All right, guys, so obviously when we have an electrical problem like this, the first and most basic thing that you want to do is check the battery. If our battery is low or dead, we're obviously not going to be able to power up the vehicle. And so it's really important not to skip this step. And so what I have here are two different battery testers that have been sitting in my toolbox that I've just been waiting to use. One of them is from the guys over at KINGBOLEN. This is the BM550. And this one over here is from the guys over at ANCEL. This is the BA301. Two very affordable battery testers from two different brands. Now, I will say the KINGBOLEN is the cheaper one of the two, but that's only because the ANCEL has more features. And so depending on your budget and what it is you're looking for, either one of these would be a good option. You just need to find which one is the best fit for you. Let's go ahead and test these out. All right, so we're going to start by using the BM550. I'm going to go ahead and connect the alligator clips. Positive, negative. You can see our unit powered up. It's asking us to select the battery type. This is a 12-volt system, so we'll hit OK. Now it's asking for the cold cranking amp measurement. If we take a look at the battery here, there should be a label right here. It's showing us 800 cold cranking amps is the rating. So we're going to move this up to 800. If you hold the button, it does it a lot quicker. Now we'll hit OK. And it looks like it's testing the battery now. It's showing us that we have a measurement of about 525 cold cranking amps and giving us a reading of normal. So we'll scroll down. You can see it's showing us the state of health. It's at 43%. I'll scroll down. It's giving us a state of charge, 46%. Scroll down again. It's giving us some resistance measurements here, so that's pretty interesting. Scroll down again. Then it's given us our voltage reading, which is about 12.28. So a very quick and easy to use, straightforward battery tester. I really like that this thing is pretty quick and simple to use. There's not a lot of extra features, but if you're looking for a very basic battery tester, I would definitely recommend this. All right, so now we're gonna test out the ANCEL BA301. This is the more expensive unit of the two. And as you can see, this one actually comes with a cool little bag and a user manual. So let's go ahead and pull this out of the package. I'm gonna go ahead and connect the positive to the positive, and the negative to the negative. And right off the bat, you can see why this one is so much more expensive. It's got a really nice display, and it's got quite a few more features. And so we're going to go ahead and select car. It's asking us the location of the battery. It is in the vehicle. If you look here, you can see that there's actually different tests we can do. We can do a battery test. We can also do a cranking test and a charging test. We're here to do a battery test, so I'm going to click enter. It's giving us some instructions here. So we'll hit enter. This is just a regular flooded battery, cold cranking amps. And again, we have 800 cold cranking amp rating on our battery. So we're going to scroll up to 800. hit enter, and just like that, we've got our results. You can see the state of health. It's at 68%, so it's at good recharge. It's giving us a cold cranking amp reading of 549 amps, which sounds pretty close to what the KINGBOLEN told us. It's giving us our voltage reading of about 12.3 volts, and it's even giving us that resistance measurement. So there you have it, 2 different battery testers for 2 different price ranges. Again, the KINGBOLEN here is the cheaper one of the 2. Now, it doesn't have as many features as the ANCEL, but again, if you guys are looking for just a basic battery tester, this is still a really good option. But if you need more, something that also does charging system test, the ANCEL is a good option. All right, guys, so obviously we have something a little more complicated here. We've already checked our battery. We know that it's pretty much got a good charge. There has to be some type of electrical problem here. Now I'm really curious about how this ignition switch powers up this vehicle. So let's go ahead and take a look at the wiring diagram, figure out what powers up this ignition so that we can come back and do some testing. All right, guys, so here we have the wiring diagram for the power distribution. Now what I want to do is start by taking you over to page number 4, because this is where we are going to find our ignition switch. So let me zoom in here. If you look at this rectangular box here, this is going to be our ignition switch. Now, if you look inside of the ignition switch, you can see that we have 2 sets of ganged switches. Now, what I mean by these being ganged switches is that if you look at this dotted line, well, this essentially ties these 2 switches together, meaning that they move together. So when one moves, the other one is also going to move with it. If you look over here to the right, you can see that we have the same thing. 2 switches that are ganged together. You can see our dotted line that ties them together. So we can start here by taking a look at our 2 main powers that are coming into our ignition switch. So first of all, over here on pin number 1, we have a power coming in on this red and white wire. I'm going to go ahead and highlight it. Now, if you follow this red and white wire up, you can see that its power comes from this 10 amp fuse that is located inside the right rear fuse block below the right rear seat. And if you look down here, you'll notice that this power actually gets spliced off to what looks like our ignition lock cylinder control actuator. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with the term, this essentially is going to be our lock solenoid that is used to lock the key into the ignition switch. So essentially, if we don't have power getting to this ignition lock cylinder control actuator, we're not going to be able to remove the key. That's just something to keep in mind. Now, if we come back to this fuse box where we have our 10 amp fuse, if we follow it up and out of the fuse box, it shows that this power feed comes from the letter C, which is a continuation of another wiring diagram. It says here page 2 of 7. So let's go ahead and move over to page number 2 and locate our letter C. Okay, so here we are on page number 2, and if you look right over here, you can see that we have our continuation letter C. So if we follow it up, you can see that this power actually comes from a 60 amp fuse that is located in the underhood fuse block, which is on the right front of the engine compartment. Now, if we follow this power through the 60 amp fuse, if I highlight this, then I'll highlight this as well, and finally this here. You'll see that our 60 amp fuse gets its power from letter A, which is a continuation of diagram number 1 of 7. So let's go ahead and move over to page number 1 and see if we can locate our letter A. All right, so here we are on page number 1, and I've located our letter A, which is our continuation here. I'm going to go ahead and highlight it, and then I'm going to highlight our path through the fuse block. Again, if you guys take a look, you're going to see that we're actually still in the underhood fuse block on the right front side of the engine compartment. And so if we follow it out of the fuse box, you'll see that our fuses get their power directly from the battery positive. So essentially, in a nutshell, moving back to our ignition switch over here, our power on pin number 1 is going to come from 2 different fuses. One fuse that's a 10 amp fuse located in the right rear fuse block below the right rear seat. And this 10 amp fuse gets its power from a 60 amp fuse that's located in the fuse block under the hood. Again, these powers through these 2 fuses in these 2 fuse boxes come directly from the battery positive, which means they should be a power at all times. Now, if we look at what this power on pin number 1 feeds, you'll notice that if we turn the ignition switch to the run position, we're going to be feeding power to several different components. First of all, we have this pink wire on pin number 3, and if you follow that, you can see that it actually splices off in several different directions. If I highlight this, you can see that it goes over to the underhood fuse block and it feeds the power to the compressor clutch relay. And if I highlight this here, you'll see that it also feeds power to the right rear fuse block, and it's the power for the ignition number 1 relay. Now, if I highlight this one up here, you can see that it also feeds power to our dash integration module. Now, if we look over at pin number 2, which is a brown wire, I'm going to go ahead and highlight this. You'll see that it also powers up the dash integration module, and it powers up the underhood fuse block and feeds the accessory relay. So there's a lot of important stuff that is powered up by this pin number 1 power. Now let's go ahead and take a look at pin number 6. If you look inside the ignition switch, you'll see that when this switch is in the run position, this is going to feed power to both the ECM on pin number 4 and the left rear fuse block on pin number 5. Again, really important stuff here. Now following up the power here on pin number 6, you can see that it comes from letter G, which is a continuation from page number 2. So here we are on page number 2. I've already located letter G, and so I'm going to highlight this. And as you can see, this actually gets its power from this ignition switch fuse, which is a 10 amp fuse located in the underhood fuse block. Now what you'll notice is that if I highlight this fuse block, this is the same power source that fed our 60 amp fuse that fed our pin number 1 at our ignition switch. So already I know that if I follow this power out of this fuse block, it's going to be coming from the battery positive. So that means that the power on pin number 6 is going to be a battery power at all times. So now that we know where our powers for our ignition switch are located and we know where they come from, let's go ahead and move back to the vehicle and see if we can find them. All right guys, so moving back over to the car, you can see I have my power probe. It is connected to the battery. And again, luckily our friend already went ahead and removed the cover down here. Let me show you where the ignition switch is located. This here is our ignition switch and this here is the connector. Let me unplug it for you guys. There you go. This is the connector for our ignition switch. Now, if we turn it around, we actually have some numbers on this connector. I don't know if that's showing up on the camera, but if you look at the screen starting from the right, that's going to be pin number 1, our red and white wire. And then moving over to the left, we have pin 2, 3, 4, 5, and then finally 6 on this side, which again is a red and white wire. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check both of our red and white wires at pin number 1 and pin number 6, and we're going to see if we have power at these. Let me go ahead and plug this back in. There we go. I'll take my back probe and I'm going to slide it in like so. Oh, this back probe might be a little too thick for this. Okay, we might not be able to back probe these because my back probes, I think, are too thick for this connector. Yeah, so I don't have any thinner back probes. I'm gonna have to pierce the wire. All right, so I've got my piercing tool here. I'm gonna go ahead and hook the wire. Make sure we got a good bite. Yep, that looks good to me. I'm just gonna connect this little lead to it. Then we'll connect the other end of the lead to the power probe. As you guys can see, let me shut this little beeper off. You guys can see we're not showing any voltage here. Okay, that's interesting. Let's go ahead and check our other wire. I'll just take this off. Then we'll go ahead and hook the other wire. Make sure I got a good bite on there. Yeah, that looks good to me. And take a look at that, guys. We have battery power here, 12.3 volts. And so we know our problem here is that we're missing a power at this red and white wire, which if I'm not mistaken, I believe that was pin number 1. Let me take a look at this again. Yeah, pin number 1, the pin all the way to the right, that's where we're missing our power. All right guys, so just for shimmies and giggles, I want to try something out real quick. What I want to try to do is I want to try to use the rocker switch here on the power probe to backfeed a power into that wire and see if we can start this vehicle up. All right, I only have 2 hands, so I'm going to try to do this while holding the camera. So I'm going to stick the key into the ignition and I'm going to turn the ignition on. And again, as you guys can see, nothing powers up here, but let's see what happens when we feed a power to it. So I'm going to flick the rocker switch. Take a look at that, guys. Our instrument cluster just lit up. Ooh, I can feel the AC blowing. The radio and everything is on. Our AC head unit is on. Let's see if we can start the vehicle up. Check it out, guys. I was able to crank up the engine. This car is now up and running. Take a look at that. You can see that the RPM gauge is showing 1,000 RPM. So this engine is actually running at the moment. And as long as I've got my finger here on this power trigger, I'm back feeding power into the ignition switch and I'm able to start this vehicle up. Let's see what happens when I let go of the power switch. The engine just died, it stalled out. You can see the tachometer went back down to 0. And let's see if the key comes out. Nope, our key does not come out of the ignition. I wonder if I held this power switch, would the key come out of the ignition? So I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna power this up and then let's see if we can get this key out. There we go, came out. Okay, so let's try this again. Stick the key back in, turn it on, start the engine up. I'm gonna shut it off, see if I can take the key out. Yep, there we go. Key comes out of the ignition. All right, so obviously whatever's happening here seems to be happening because we're missing our power here at the ignition switch at pin number 1. So let's go ahead and do some back tracing. All right, guys, so according to the wiring diagram, they're saying that we have a fuse box beneath the right rear seat. Now, when I came back here and I lifted up the seat, I didn't find a fuse box. So if you look down here, you can see that we got this carpet here. Now, let me lift up the carpet and show you. There is nothing down here. So I'm not sure what fuse box it is they're talking about. Let me see if I can get some more information on this.
A few moments later.
All right, guys, so I did a little bit of searching on the internet. I Googled it and I found the location of these fuse boxes. Now, they are underneath the seat. However, you got to peel back this part of the carpet here to expose the fuse box. Now there's actually one on this side and there's another one on that side over there. So you can see that there's 2 fuse boxes down here. Now, according to the diagram, the fuse that we're looking for is going to be on this side. So let me pull this cover off And there we have the layout for the fuses. Let me see if I can find the one that we're looking for. Let's see, is there anything that says ignition? Yeah, I see one right there, guys. You see it? It's a 10 amp. It says RIM/ignition switch. So let's go ahead and take a look at the fuse box here, and then we'll figure out the orientation of the diagram. Looks like this joint connector right here is going to be this one over here. So it looks to me like the layout goes this way. Yeah, that looks correct. So if we look at the layout of the fuses, our ignition fuse is going to be the third one down on the right over here. So it's going to be this one right here. Let me get my power probe. All right, so I've got the power probe here. Let's go ahead and test the fuse. We'll start by touching this side. Oh, take a look at that. You can see that we don't have any power on that side of the fuse. Now let's check the other side of the fuse. Oh, bam, we got battery power on that side of the fuse. So we definitely have a blown fuse here. Let me go ahead and pull it out. I can't get it out by hand. Oh, there's a fuse puller right here. Let's go ahead and use this. Come on, get out of there. There we go. And we'll just hook onto this fuse here. Make sure we got a good bite. And pull up. There we go. And let's take a look at this fuse. Well, you can't see it when I'm holding it with a fuse holder, so let me get it off of the fuse holder. And there we have it, guys. This is a blown fuse. See that little bridge in the middle? Okay, so let's go ahead and pop another fuse in here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I've got a new fuse here. Well, it's not a new fuse. I pulled it out of a junk fuse box, but this is a good 10 amp fuse, so we're gonna go ahead and stick it in here. And there we go. Now, let's see if we can start this thing up. All right, so here's the moment of truth. I've got the key in my hand, and we're gonna try to start this thing up. Already you can see the ignition. The dash is powered up, our radio is powered up, everything is powered up. So let's try to start this thing up. Bam, we are back up and running. Okay, so our car is running, but will the key come out of the ignition? Let's try it. Yep, our key just came out of the ignition. Stick it back in. Let me turn it back off. Key comes out. Let's try it one more time for good measure. Key on, key off, key comes out of the ignition. Now let's try to start this thing up. And it starts and runs. Okay. All right, guys, well, there you have it. We fixed part of the problem. We got the vehicle up and running. The ignition switch is working. We can pull the key out of the ignition, all because of a blown fuse. Now, the problem here is that when it comes to fuses blowing, there's a saying that I like to live by, and it pretty much says that a fuse does not blow for no reason. There had to have been some type of short to ground or some surge in power that caused the fuse to blow. It's very unlikely that the fuse itself just decided to blow for no reason. I mean, is it possible? It is possible, but it's very unlikely. So at this point, I'm more focused on trying to figure out whether or not we have some type of intermittent short to ground, because of course right now our short to ground is not happening. If there was a constant short to ground, then as soon as we put the fuse in, that fuse would have blown. Our problem here is something intermittent, meaning it doesn't happen all the time. The right circumstances have to happen, maybe the right vibration, maybe heat. And so the first thing I want to do is a quick visual inspection to see if we can find anything obvious. All right, guys, so the first thing that I'd like to mention is that I did notice that when I first opened up the hood, I saw a lot of this crap under the hood. Dead leaves, which is really good for rodents to nest in. And if you look up here on top of the intake manifold, you can see that we've got a lot of leaves up here. Now, I'm not sure if anything was actually living in this engine bay, because quite honestly, I didn't find any droppings. Usually if you have a rodent living in the engine bay, first of all, you can usually smell it. And second of all, you'll find a lot of little droppings laying around on top of the engine. In this case, I don't really smell anything, nor do I see any droppings. So I kind of get the feeling that maybe all this is here just from the car sitting under a tree for so long. Now, the other thing I'd like to show you guys is something that I find really interesting, because this came from the factory this way. So again, if we peel back this carpet, what you'll notice is that all of the wiring back here is all exposed. They don't put any wire loom or any type of insulation to cover up these wires. So they're all rubbing up against the body of the car. Now, I've already taken a good look at these wires, and I don't see any of them that are chafing. You know, there are some suspect areas, of course, like this area right here that's laying right on the edge here. But if you look at the wires, none of them are chafed or exposed. I don't see any damage to the wiring. And so there's really nothing obvious here. Even looking at the driver's side over here, I took a look at these wires and I didn't see any damage. So I find it pretty interesting that GM did not put any wire loom over these wires. However, like I said, I don't see any obvious signs of damage. So it's not like I can say that them not protecting the wires is the reason we have a short to ground. The other interesting thing to note here is that if in fact we do have a short to ground on our red and white wire going to our ignition switch, that short to ground has to be inside of the vehicle. It's not going to be outside or under the hood. Let me explain to you what I mean. So if you guys remember, our problem was that our 10 amp fuse in this fuse box back here was blown. Now, this 10 amp fuse feeds the power to our ignition switch up there at the steering wheel. So the wire running from this fuse box over here to the steering wheel runs through the inside of the vehicle. And if you guys remember, this 10 amp fuse gets its power from another fuse that's located in the fuse box under the hood. Even if we had a short to ground in the wiring that comes from the fuse box under the hood going to this fuse box over here, that would have blown the fuse under the hood, not the fuse back here. The only way the fuse back here is going to blow is if our short to ground is somewhere in the wire between this fuse box and the ignition switch up there. Hopefully what I'm saying makes sense. Now, the other thing I'd like to mention is that while I was doing the visual inspection on the inside of the vehicle, I was kind of hoping to find maybe some type of aftermarket system installed, maybe an aftermarket radio, maybe an alarm system, maybe like a remote key setup, something like that. Because generally, the only time you get some type of short to ground inside of the vehicle is when somebody's been poking around, messing with stuff, or they installed some type of aftermarket system. The only problem here is that everything is factory. The radio is factory. If you look underneath the steering wheel, there's no aftermarket alarm system, no remote starter. There's nothing wired in with the ignition switch. Everything down here looks just like the way it did when it rolled off of the factory lot. This vehicle is actually owned by an elderly couple. They don't really care for all of that fancy aftermarket crap. All right, guys, so at this point, I'm calling this a partial fix. Now, the reason I can't say that it's 100% a fix, well, because of course we didn't figure out whether or not we had a short to ground. And so at this point, what I told my buddy was to go ahead and drive the car around and see if the fuse blows again, because if it does blow, then we know we have some type of short to ground. And if it doesn't, then maybe it was some one-off thing.
One eternity later.
All right, guys, so fast forward. It's actually been about a month now since I shot that video. I know, I'm sorry, I've been behind on doing my editing. I've got a backlog of videos. I'm working on them. However, I'm here to give you guys an update as far as the car and what happened. So, as you guys saw, we were able to fix the condition by replacing the blown fuse. However, we were not able to determine whether or not we had a short to ground. Like I said, I told my buddy Lito to go ahead and drive the car, make sure the fuse didn't blow. So he drove it for a couple days and the fuse did not blow. However, he was still having a problem with the key getting stuck in the ignition switch. So we pretty much equated it to a problem with the actuator solenoid that locks the key into the ignition switch. He did check to make sure it had power and ground whenever the key wouldn't come out of the ignition. So he was pretty certain that he had a bad actuator. Now, the only problem is that according to him, he was not able to locate anyone that had the part available. He called all of the nearby dealerships and everyone said that the part was discontinued or it was on back order. Now, if you guys didn't know, right now in the automotive industry, we have a really big problem with back ordered parts, a lot of issues with the supply chain. I've personally been experiencing it with my customers. There's a lot of parts I'm not able to get a hold of. And so a lot of times we have to make do with what we got. So because he wasn't able to get a hold of a brand new part, he ended up replacing it with a salvage unit. It's been about a month now and the vehicle has not had any problems. So anyway, at this point, I'm gonna end off the video. Like I always say, thank you guys for watching. I hope you found it useful, informational, educational, entertaining. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.